Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Or if it's your first time, welcome to my channel. My name is Marlene and I talk about eating disorder recovery and everything related to healing the relationship with your own body, with food and with movement. And today we got another interview. I'm super excited. It's with author and therapist Anita Johnston. So let's dive right in. Stay tuned until the end and let me know how you like this interview. I am here with Anita Johnston today and I am completely stunned. We were just talking before we started the interview. I actually read her book myself when I was going through recovery and when I was struggling with an eating disorder. And I just really love the approach of, the metaphorical approach. And just like looking at eating disorders as something deeper, not only on the surface, but we're going to talk about all of that today. And Anita, if you don't mind, just introducing yourself, telling a little bit about your story, and just like letting the people who are watching know who you are.
Okay, well, I'm Dr. Anita Johnston. I think it's 7 languages now. You read it in the German version, yes. Right? That's so cool. And I am also the executive clinical director of Aipono Hawaii, which is my residential eating disorder program in Hawaii. And I'm the creator of the Light of the Moon Cafe, which is an online platform of materials and courses for people who are struggling with disordered eating from all over the world. Let's see, what else about me? I'm originally from Guam. So I lived there my entire childhood and even young adulthood, not until I went away for college. And for those that don't even know where Guam is, it's a little island in the Pacific. It's 30 miles long and 10 miles wide. So I was very eager to leave when I could. And my background is indigenous, Chamorro from Guam. And Guam, if someone wants to see it on the map, it's a little dot in the Pacific. And if you go south from Japan all the way down to Australia, and then you go across from the Philippines to Hawaii, where the two cross, that's where Guam is. So that's home. And I ended up using a lot of storytelling and metaphor when I became a psychologist and started working with eating disorders back in 1982. That's a long time ago, because I was raised with a lot of stories and stories as teaching tales. And so that began my journey.
Well, thank you so much for letting us know all that. And you did write a book which we just talked about. I read the German version of. Do you mind telling the audience a little bit more about the book and also about your work, and maybe also how you got into that work and what it taught you once you started to work with eating disorders?
Mm-hmm. Like I said, well, I grew up with a lot of teaching through stories, but it wasn't actually until my daughters were young and they were going to Waldorf schools in Hawaii. I think in Europe they're called Steiner schools.
Yeah.
And everything is taught through story. So I remember when my daughters came home and said, "Oh, today we learned about Prince division and Prince multiplication." And I thought, oh my gosh, I would probably know my times tables by now if that's the way I had learned it. And so I realized, because I was at that time working with folks struggling with eating disorders, and there wasn't much written back then. There weren't any treatment programs, and there was very little that had any research of any kind. So I was just trying to figure it out. And as I started understanding it, I realized, oh, I could use stories to explain some very complex concepts that are really difficult to understand, because with eating disorders, it's about food, but it's also not about food. And so the about food, that you can see that, you can count calories, you can measure that, but the not about food was way more layered.
Yeah.
And what I discovered is that if I could tell someone a story, they could understand those different components.
I love it so much. And so when you like understood all that and understood like, hey, okay, maybe it's easier for somebody who's actually struggling with an eating disorder to grasp that topic when I tell a story, what were your next steps? Like, how did you get in touch with people? And like, how did you manage to actually, basically get your foot in into like working with people?
Well, I think it goes a little further back. It was my very first class in graduate school. I walked in, and there was a little old man speaking, and he had a very thick accent, and I had a hard time understanding, but I knew he was speaking English, so I really concentrated. And this man was Viktor Frankl. And for people who don't know who he is, he wrote one of the most brilliant books called Man's Search for Meaning, about his experience in the Nazi prison camps during World War II,
Mm.
where he lost his entire family and his wife and his parents. And what, as he was a psychiatrist at the time, and what he came to realize is that you can get stripped of everything you've ever held dear, but there's one thing that can never be taken away from you, and that is the meaning that you give to your experience. And in that meaning lies your freedom. And so, in the beginning, how I started working with eating disorders and how this all kind of came together for me is I was supervising a psychology intern who was studying the incidence of eating disorders in Hawaii. And she and I would meet, and we were joined with a third woman who was a social worker who had had her own recovery experience, but she had to figure it all out herself.
Mm.
And so every time we got together and we said, "Oh my gosh, there's so many people that are struggling. There should be a center for this." And after we said it for about the fifth time, we looked at each other and we went, "Okay, I guess we're it." And so it was one of those things, you create a center and they will come. And girls and women of all ages, all sizes, all ethnicities, all different kinds of struggles with eating and body image would show up. Now, back then, there were no guys, no males were showing up. And so I just started to try to figure this out. Okay, first of all, why is it these why is it girls and women?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it these particular girls and women? And why is the struggle around eating and food and body? So I began with that. And I began again because I'm not just a storyteller, but as a psychologist, I'm trained to be a story listener. So I decided to listen to their stories as carefully as I could to see if I could find, what does this mean? What is this all about? And so that's how I began.
That is so beautiful. And you just said something that I think is so important to listen to, actually listen to the stories of those who are, in this case, struggling with eating disorders. Because I feel like, especially in the modern world, it happens so quickly that people just get put into a box. Like, oh, they have anorexia, or they have bulimia, or they have
Yeah.
binge eating. And nobody really listens to their stories and like tries to understand what is going on. And then on top of that, of course, a lot of people are not even getting diagnosed because they don't fit into like a certain box, or people don't understand what's actually the underlying issue. If I would have gotten $1 for every time that somebody told me, oh, I guess you just like read too many magazines growing up, or you watched too many model shows, and that it was never about that for me, but
Yeah.
unfortunately a lot of
Yeah.
people really don't understand. So I think that is something so important, and I feel once you find someone while you're struggling who like really listens to you, it changes your whole experience.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, because I was looking for the common thread, right? The common denominator. What is it that can, why is it they're all fighting in this way, even though they had very diverse backgrounds? And back then, there was a little bit of research about trauma, not much. But what I found is that, yes, indeed, some of these individuals had had horrific childhoods and some big traumatic experiences, but some of them came from loving, intact families and had no significant trauma. So I thought, okay, I have to look a little more carefully to see what is it. And eventually, what I discovered is that those folks who were struggling with disordered eating of all sorts were what I call thin skinned. And what I mean by that is that we're very emotionally sensitive,
Mm.
highly intuitive individuals, which in my mind is a really great thing
Yes.
because. Our world would be in a lot better shape if our world leaders were more emotionally sensitive and intuitive. But that's not the world we live in. And so when you are born this way, and you're born this way, um, who is going to teach you how to maneuver through this thick skinned world with these kinds of sensitivities?
Yeah.
And not only that, but typically their experience was they were told, you're too sensitive, you're overreacting, what's
Mm-hmm.
wrong with you? You're just making trouble, and so on and so forth. And so what happened is they had to find a way to dim their light, to diminish this capacity to read between the lines, see the bigger picture, sense hypocrisy, tell when things were not okay, even if everyone around them was saying things were just fine. And so they stumbled upon the disordered eating as a way to do that,
Yes.
because because basically it served to either stuff or numb or distract or escape from strong feelings that they didn't know anything else to do with.
I completely agree, and it really touches me to hear that because I
Mm.
know so many people, and also like a lot of the people I am working with now are amazing people, and sensitivity is not a bad trait. It's actually the opposite. But unfortunately,
Beautiful.
in this world, we've been taught that we're being too sensitive, or
Mhm.
not hard enough, not tough enough, when it's actually the opposite. And
Mhm.
so I also think that one of the reasons why a lot of people, like especially in today's world with social media, with a lot of like, I want to say, body ideals that we see, a part might, of course, those things can be very harmful and can play a role. But I think for people who are already very, very, let's say, like sensitive, it's like way quote unquote easier for them to get basically get impacted by that, to like seeing
Mhm.
that every day and being like, oh, maybe I'm already so sensitive, I'm already different, maybe I should try to fit into a box again. So yeah.
Exactly. Exactly, because when you're thin skinned, what might be no big deal to somebody else penetrates your very
Yes.
bones. And you said something, because I think one of the things that happens is these folks confuse this longing to belong, which we are all born with fitting in. And they're not the same thing.
Mm.
Fitting in is when you try to look like, act like, think like, feel like how you imagine others want you to look and act and think and feel. And in order to do that, you disconnect from your authentic self.
Mm.
Belonging comes when you stay connected to your authentic self and you connect with another person. And so it's kind of ironic, because what recovery really is being your authentic self and being able to bring all of who you are to the relationships that you participate in. And trying to fit in is what fuels the disordered eating behaviors and thoughts.
And I just want to, for all the viewers right now, really, really want you, or like would like you guys to take a moment to really think about that, because oftentimes the more somebody goes into the eating disorder, the more disconnected they get,
Yeah.
even though they might feel like they're fitting in better. So I think that is something to keep in mind, that recovery can also allow connection and like real human connection, which, once you have this, you don't even need to fit in, because the real human connection is like so much deeper and so much more important than the feeling of fitting in. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think it helps to understand that the eating disorder has a job to do. Nobody has an eating disorder or struggles with disordered eating because they're stupid or broken or damaged in some
mm,
way. There's a function to it, and an important function, and it would behoove you to find out what that function is. And so, one of the functions is to help tolerate this tension that comes from feeling disconnected. And we all experience it to one degree or another. So, because we're mammals, we're born with two very powerful drives. One is the drive for connection
Mm-hmm.
and attachment, right? We're not lizards. We don't just hatch out of an egg and go on our way. We're not turtles. No, we're mammals. And so what that means is we have to develop a strong connection, attachment to our caregivers in order to survive, in order to be fed and clothed and taken care of. So that's why we have this really, really strong drive. We need it. However, because we're human mammals, we have another equally powerful drive, and that's the drive for authenticity. That's the drive to be who we're meant to be, to go where we're meant to go in life, to live our own unique destiny, which is as unique as our thumbprint.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens, and again, this happens to all of us, some more than others, throughout our childhood, these two drives come into conflict. And guess which one wins? Attachment.
Oh, okay.
Because we have to survive,
Well,
right?
that makes sense, yeah.
So what this looks like is that a little kid wants a cookie. And mommy says, no, you can't have a cookie. We're having dinner in an hour. And little kid goes, I want a cookie. I want a cookie. And mommy says, if you don't cut that out, you're not getting any cookies at all. So little kid goes, okay, I don't want a cookie, right? Because little kid knows I have to be the way mommy wants me to be in order to have that connection, in order for me to get my needs met. Now, this in and of itself is not problematic, but what can happen is there a pattern can develop given our life situations of whenever there's a conflict between the two, we choose attachment and we think we have to be the way that person wants us to be, and we abandon our authenticity. And so what happens then, we carry this pattern of whenever there's a conflict, we always choose attachment over authenticity. We carry this into adulthood when really authenticity needs to win, as you zeroed in on, right?
Yeah.
And because whenever we choose attachment over authenticity, it creates a tension in our being. Think of a towel being twisted in two different directions, right? That tension. And eventually that tension becomes painful. And we will grab onto anything we can to alleviate that pain, to distract us, to numb it. And this is the vacuum in which the disordered eating comes in.
Wow.
So, what recovery involves is learning how to have attachment and connection without abandoning yourself. So, some people think, okay, I can be myself as long as I'm by myself. Well, that's the job of the eating disorder. It keeps a nice little bubble around you that nobody has access to, right? The whole isolation thing. Or you enter a relationship and you leave a big chunk of yourself at the doorstep. And here comes that tension. And so again, the eating disorder has a job to do. And sometimes we might do what we call sabotage so that we can go back to being ourselves and be by ourselves and be ourselves. So it's developing a skill. And again, if you're emotionally sensitive, highly intuitive, that means you're really, really, really good at picking up on how others want you to be.
Oh, yeah.
And it becomes so automatic to be that way. Sometimes you don't even realize you've disconnected from your authentic self, but you'll feel the tension. And that's when you'll turn to eating disorder behaviors and thoughts.
And that is also something that I can definitely relate to without even knowing what's going on, feeling some kind of tension. I think for a lot of people that's, in the shape of anxiety or however it shows up, but like feeling that something is not right, but not being able to basically put a finger on it because that's what we learn from like childhood age. So we don't even know what's going on because chances are that our parents aren't aware either because they also grew up a certain way. And I think that's why your work is so important to actually, it's basically like a wake-up call for so many people to understand like, hey, this is not how it's supposed to be. Like, you should not hide yourself. You should not leave your true self at the door when you're in any kind of relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or any interpersonal relationship. And I think it also comes back to what we said at the beginning. For somebody who is very sensitive, this is not, I mean, it's not sustainable for anyone, but for somebody who is very sensitive, it just feels so wrong that it's only logical that some coping mechanisms come up.
Yeah, because what happens when you pick up, okay, there's something wrong, and maybe nobody else picks up on that, then you're left to think, well, then there must be something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And so he comes home from work angry. I must have done something wrong. They don't return my call. There must be something wrong with me. This doesn't move as quickly as I would like. There must be something wrong with me. This is a little more difficult than I realize. There must be something. Everything gets interpreted as there must be something wrong with me. And so when you go, well, there's something wrong with me, well, what's the closest thing you see? Your body. So you assume, oh, here's the culprit.
Yes,
and
very,
it's
very true.
easy to make that leap for all of us. We all do it, right? Fill in the blank. If we don't understand something, we fill in the blank with our worst insecurity.
That is very, very true. And when we take a look at recovery from any eating disorder now, what would you say, what role plays, working with metaphors in recovery? How can that be helpful? And what would you say is a big difference to, I want to say, quote unquote, traditional treatment?
Well, I think, as I mentioned earlier, eating disorders are about food. So that's the physical, literal stuff. But the not about food is non-physical. It's emotions and it's intuitions and it's patterns. And so how can you describe, how can you talk about that which is not physical? And that's where metaphor comes in, because it helps us not just understand things, but also access the feeling level of what's going on. And for someone who's emotionally sensitive, this is important. So, for example, here's a metaphor. Romeo says, Juliet is the sun. Now, if we were to look at that literally, we would say, well, is Juliet a flaming ball of hydrogen? Right? It's like, what? But then when we look at it metaphorically, and by the way, when we do that, we're using a different part of our brain. We're using the right side of our brain that can see connections between things. And so the left side of our brain would try to make a list of all the qualities of Juliet in the sun, and we wouldn't get very far. But the right side of our brain can get those subtle, nuanced connections and go, oh, she lights up his world. Now, with this understanding, you even get to feel what Romeo is feeling for Juliet, right? There's so much information that can get packed into a metaphor, and it helps us respond to it uniquely. So, if you approach recovery from eating disorders as though it's a recipe, right? First you do this, then you do this, then you do this, that it doesn't help address the uniqueness of someone's being. But if I give a metaphor, then someone can see, oh, this is how it applies to me. This is what fits for me. And so it makes it more personal, makes your recovery, not somebody else's idea of what recovery looks like or should be.
I completely agree. And I see actually so many people in recovery asking, like, hey, what am I supposed to do? A lot of people want to listen to stories from people who recovered from an eating disorder because they think they will get the final magic answer when it's like way more individual. And I understand where it's coming from, because we live in a world where we're trying to make lists and to organize and to explain. And I think some people, or like basically a lot of people with eating disorders, also have tendency to like, wanting to be perfect, to optimize everything. So it's understandable where it's coming from. And at the same time, as you said, it's so much more individual. And a lot of people also like feel a complete detachment from their bodies. How would you say, can, metaphoric work help to learn to get in touch with your body again and to actually, learn to become a team again?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the metaphor that I like to use most to describe the recovery process, and is my favorite one because I still get emails and letters from people all over the world saying this one metaphor helped them transform their whole experience with the eating disorder. So I'm going to share it right now, and then I'll talk about, okay, how does that work? So imagine, because we always with metaphors we use our imagination, which is our superpower. And some people say, well, I don't have a good imagination. And I like to say, what do you think worry is? Right?
That is so
Worry is a
true.
bad use of a really good imagination. So imagine you're on the banks of a raging river. It's pouring down rain. You slip, you fall in, and you're drowning. You're getting pulled down through the rapids. And along comes a big log, and you grab on. And that log saves your life. It keeps your head above water when surely you would have drowned, and eventually carries you to a place in the river where the water is calm. And from there, you can see the riverbank, but you can't get there because of the log. So the irony is the very thing that saved your life is now getting in the way of you going where you want to go in life. And to make it more complicated, there's always somebody on the riverbank yelling, let go of the log, let go of the log. And you feel like an absolute idiot because you're afraid to let go of that log. Well, the way I see it is letting go of that log might not be the best thing to do initially. Because what happens if you let go of that log, start to swim to shore, get halfway there and realize, oh, you don't have the strength to make it. That means you don't have the strength to make it back to the log either, and you're really sunk. So I believe that we all have a wise part of ourselves that will not let us let go of anything until we're good and ready. So
Hmm.
what do you do instead? Well, let go of the log and try floating. And as soon as you start to sink, grab back on. Then you let go of the log and you try treading water. And when you get tired, you grab back on. Then you let go of the log and you swim around it once, grab back on, twice, grab back on, 10 times, 100 times, 200 times, whatever it takes for you to have the strength and confidence to make it to shore. Then you let go of the log. Now, you see, with this metaphor, I didn't mention eating disorders once or
Mm-hmm.
food. But what I am talking about is I am talking about the process of um, of the recovery journey. And the
Yeah.
first thing is you have to realize and appreciate that that disordered eating has served a function and an important function. It has kept you afloat when surely you would have drowned in some strong emotional currents because you didn't have the strength, the resources to do anything but grab on. The other thing is it's introducing the idea there are skills that a person needs to learn in
Mm.
order to get where they want to go in life. And so, this metaphor is also introducing that idea. And one of those skills is interoceptive awareness, proprioceptive awareness, the ability to recognize sensations in your body and respond to them. So, interoceptive awareness, or it's sensing your body from the inside out, not the outside
Mm.
in. And this is the antidote, by the way, to negative body image, which is when you're outside of yourself imagining. That's why there's the word image, how you're supposed to look. So interoceptive awareness is when you say, my heart is pounding, my head is hurting, my stomach is growling. That's awareness of what's going on inside your body. So that is really one of the key skills that a person needs to totally, completely recover from disordered eating, which is absolutely possible, by the way.
I love that you're pointing that out, and I also love my next question would have been about body image, but you pretty much answered it already.
Mhm.
Like I think the struggling with body image and struggling with weight gain when you're coming from a restrictive eating disorder can be
Mhm.
so hard for people, or even people who are caught in a binge restrict cycle and feel like they're
Mhm.
binging but not understanding that the restriction is
Mhm.
causing that.
Mhm.
Oftentimes the body image is holding people back. They're so afraid
Right,
of not being able to cope with, weight gain, for instance. And
right.
I think understanding that changing the perspective is not only possible but even
Mhm.
mandatory
Mhm.
makes so much sense because
I think, especially in today's world, you will always find something that you could not like about yourself. Unfortunately, there's always something that you personally just won't like about yourself. I'm not saying that anyone else won't like it, but I think once we understand that, and once we understand that we have to basically go from the inside out and not the other way around, it changes everything.
Yeah, it's sort of with disordered eating, with body image, it's sort of like if you walk into a dark room, you don't try to push the darkness out. You just turn on a light.
Mm.
So with negative body image, what you do is you strengthen your ability to read your body from the inside. That's like turning on the light.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for example, at Ipono, which is my residential program on Maui in Hawaii, I run a group with the women there, and I begin every group with a guided imagery where I have them move their awareness around, just around different inside their body, from the top of their head to the bottom of their spine to the bottom of their feet. And just doing this alone, there's so much research now that shows that not only is this helpful for body image, because it stabilizes your body image. So, an unstable body image is one that is dependent on external forces, like a comment made by somebody,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe seeing yourself in a photograph, or something like that can just.
Yeah.
You're feeling okay, and the next minute, oh my God, I'm so fat, I'm so ugly, I'm so whatever. And so, the greater your interoceptive awareness, the more stable your body image is, and you're less vulnerable to these external events.
Mm-hmm.
Is one thing. But also, the research has shown that the greater your interoceptive awareness, the less depression, the less anxiety you experience, which that in and of itself is pretty cool.
Yeah.
The easier it is to focus and accomplish your goals. There's so many things. They just started doing research in the last 20 so years. It helps you create greater boundaries, which that's a key skill
Mm-hmm.
for recovery. It regulates your emotions, sharpens your attention. I mean, there's so many positive aspects. And for those that are struggling with trauma, it helps connect the signals, the sensations in your body with the vagus nerve, which
Mm-hmm.
is a lot of what you're working with trauma. And that connects you to a part of your brain called the insula that helps you regulate. So, all of this can come from spending more time just with your awareness inside your body.
And isn't that amazing? I feel like we're always looking for the great, crazy answer in the outside when the answer could be so simple. So, thank you so much for bringing that up. I actually love to work with, like nervous system regulation.
Mm-hmm.
I always like to explain scientific backgrounds too, just because I feel like for a lot of people, it can be hard to even give things a try when they're like, well, why would that work? But especially, for instance, like the vagus nerve is something that we now know for sure is so important in trauma healing, as you just said, and also in overall well-being. And it doesn't even always have to be like the whole 20 days of regulating your nervous system. It can be something that simple and that easy.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, the world we're living in now, in terms of neuroscience, I find it really exciting. I'm a bit of a geek because it helps me understand things that I intuitively or experientially understood. But for example, going back to metaphor. So what they know now, because they can monitor the brain, so that when somebody gets a metaphor, let's say they discover the metaphors of the foods that they struggle with, right? And they go, oh, yeah, I'm always wanting sweet foods because I feel like I'm not sweet enough, or there's not enough sweetness in my life. And they get this connection, this insight. What happens is right here above in a little fold in our brain above our right ear, is a part of the brain called the anterior superior temporal gyrus, shoots out a blast of gamma waves when you have that insight, which is the highest electrical frequency in the brain, and it creates new neural pathways. So your brain literally changes when you have those
Wow.
aha moments.
Wow.
And we also know that you can change the brain through repetition. So for example, again, at my treatment center, we have individuals really, and it's annoying, I understand, it's a nuisance that before they eat anything, they might give themselves on a scale of 1 to 10, find out what their hunger level is, with 1 being famished, 10 being stuffed, 5 being neutral. And then after they eat, give themselves a number. Now, what this is doing through the repetition is they are literally creating new neural pathways in their brain. Because if you think of like the neural pathways, that's what our thoughts travel down. So if you think of a sled at the top of a hill, and when it goes down that hill, it creates a pathway. And then the next time it goes down faster and then faster and faster. That super highway. But then you say, no, I want to go down over there. Well, it's going to take a few times of going down that, but eventually that will become the new superhighway. And this one over here dissolves, it disintegrates in the brain. And so I like to tell the patients, when you leave Ipono, you're taking your brain with you. Right?
Yeah.
So the neuroscience for me is really exciting because it does give another way of understanding what's going on.
It does, and I can absolutely relate with that because I just love everything about neuroscience, understanding. It was actually something that helped me in my own recovery a lot, like substantially, especially the image that you just created was one that I'm not sure if I actually might have read it in your book or if it was somewhere else, but like
Yeah,
the mammal
probably
going
not,
down.
because I didn't know that when I wrote the book
Oh,
back
okay.
then.
Well, then it's just like an amazing coincidence, I guess. But I remember I had like a journal where I was writing all of those things down, and that was one that I'm now like, that I use with my clients, which is why I also love to work with positive affirmations, but also to explain why they actually work. Like, a part of your brain, their reticular activating system, is looking for proof for your thoughts. And so the more often you think that thought, the more proof you will find. But again, it's like something that can, have such a big impact on recovery. And I think it's just amazing that you're sharing those things with the patients in your residential treatment program, but also with everyone out there. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that happens a lot in the recovery journey is that people think, oh, I was doing good and then I messed up and now I'm just a loser all over again. And it's like, well, not really, because every single time you have disordered eating thought or behavior or episode, if you can just say, okay, knowing what I know now, if I could roll the clock back, what could I have done differently? At what point, how far back do I have to go in time before I didn't get to that place where, the train was out of the station and I'm in behaviors or thoughts? Just doing that in your mind changes things.
Yes.
So because you're creating a different pathway in your brain. So it's really useful to drop the judgment, which is not easy, I understand, but to do everything you can to be curious. Okay, why did I do that? Not why did I do that, but I wonder what was going on, and start backtracking to the point in which you felt the tension.
Yes.
And then say, okay, what could I have done differently at that point in time?
Yes. That's such a good tip, I want to say, actually, because that's what it is. What would you say? How can somebody who is struggling with their eating, maybe even like trying to recover, but is sometimes unsure if they're, if it's actually like their actual hunger cues, or if they're very impacted by whatever culture society is telling them. I feel like we have so many food rules, and everyone is telling you something else, like what to eat, what not to eat. How can somebody really distinguish, especially with a history of an eating disorder, hey, is this really what I want to eat? Or am I very impacted by what I think I should eat?
Good question, because that is essential. Again, we're back to interoceptive awareness, right? Because if you can imagine two tanks, And I'm going to just call them tank A and tank B. And tank A is the tank you fill when you need physical nourishment. You fill it with food. Tank B is the tank you fill when you need soul nourishment, emotional or spiritual nourishment, and you fill it with things like attention, affection, appreciation, meditation, prayer, and so on. But we
Mm-hmm.
don't know this. We think there's one tank.
Mm-hmm.
So before we know it, tank A is either full and overflowing and we're still hungry, or we're afraid to even begin to fill tank A because we won't be able to stop. So the first step is learning to tease the two tanks apart. And you do it with interoceptive awareness.
Mm-hmm.
You find the physical sensation that you experience when you are hungry and where in your body is it. So I might say to someone, well, what's the physical experience you have when you're hungry? Where in your body is it? And someone will go, oh, I feel lightheaded and dizzy. No, that's not hunger, that's famished.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the sensation of hunger is much more subtle. It's a whisper, not a shout. But let's say all you know is lightheaded and dizzy. Well, you go get the food and start to eat and take only 2 bites. And then you ask yourself, am I still hungry? Yeah, I'm still kind of wonky. Okay, take 2 more bites. Am I still hungry? Well, I'm not lightheaded, but I'm feeling this sensation here. Keep going, 2 bites at a time, and you're looking for a physical sensation, not like, oh, I'm satisfied. No, physical, like a contraction or an expansion, a heaviness, a lightness, a roughness, a smoothness, a hollowness, a density, a warmth, a coolness. Physical
Mm-hmm.
sensation is what you're looking for. Until when you say, am I still hungry? The answer is no. Well, how do I know I'm not hungry? And again, you look for a contraction, an expansion, a heaviness, lightness, rough, some physical sensation. And this takes a little bit of practice because we've been taught not to do this. We've been taught
Mm-hmm.
to eat because it's time to eat, or because you have to be a member of the Clean Plate Club. Now, mind you, sometimes if you've been struggling with a restriction for quite a while, you may have to be on a food plan where you're working with a dietitian. Um, However, you're not going to be on a food plan the rest of your
Yeah.
life. You really do need to learn these sensations. So that's the first step. And so if that's all there were to the story, that'd be fine, but there's more to the story, because let's say you're reaching for the pizza. You check in, not a hunger signal inside. You want to eat that pizza. Well, guess what? You've now just stumbled down Alice in Wonderland's rabbit hole and you've landed smack dab in tank B. And in tank B, this is the world of metaphor. Pizza's not pizza. Food isn't food. What is it? A concrete physical symbol of another kind of hunger you're experiencing and probably don't even know about. So, how do you find out? So the first question to ask yourself is, okay, what's the feeling I'm trying not to feel? Because we don't eat for emotional reasons. We eat because we don't want to feel our feelings. We don't restrict for emotional reasons. We want to restrict our emotions, right? So could there possibly be a feeling I don't want to feel? And maybe you go scan your day. Am I still annoyed at the person who cut me off on the freeway? Or am I worried about an upcoming parent teacher meeting? Or am I concerned about something that my boss said? You look, because it possibly be, but most of the time, I have to tell you, the answer is going to be, I don't know. I feel fine, right? Because it's not in your awareness. So here's the good news: the food will tell you. The food is talking to you, but it's talking in metaphor. So, you got to crack the code. So, what's the code? Well, sweet foods usually have to do with feeling like you're not sweet enough, or there's not enough sweetness in your life. Crunchy, salty foods have to do with unexpressed anger and frustration. Warm foods are often connected to a longing for emotional warmth. Spicy foods, now mind you, this is whether you're hungry and not letting yourself eat the food, or you aren't hungry and are wanting to eat the food. Spicy foods have to do with excitement, stimulation, and change. And chocolate, we know this from Valentine's Day, love and romance and sensuality and sexuality. So once you start to notice these qualities in the foods, it's going to point you towards what you're really hungry for.
Wow.
And if anyone wants, if any of your listeners want, you can download a PDF of this. Just go to lightofthemooncafe.com, and I have a whole activity that someone can just download and follow to see, okay, what if I'm wanting to eat muffins, what does this mean if I'm not hungry? And you can track it. It's actually kind of fun.
It sounds amazing, and I think one thing that I would like to add, if that's okay, is at least in my experience, oftentimes it just takes some time. Like, oftentimes, especially after a prolonged time of restriction, people might have mental hunger that they need to listen to for quite some time, or people,
Yeah.
might feel like, I think for me, I remember once I let myself eat, I had phases where I was like, oh, what if I cannot stop? But I still did let myself eat. And I was like, I need this period of time now to show my body and mind we're safe. And it just like went away after a certain time. I never became like, it was never like I right now it's never about not being able to stop, because my body feels very safe and know that there's enough food coming, and that we're not in a scarcity. And at the same time, I think even somebody who doesn't struggle or who has never struggled with an eating disorder can probably benefit from thinking about that and being like, okay, why do I have a certain craving for special food so much, even like outside of struggling with an eating disorder?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's the case for all of us, right? It is that we have certain cravings, sometimes that have to do with memories that were positive, for example, and now we're missing that time in our lives, or that person in our lives that is connected to that food. But here's the thing. Once it comes into consciousness, once you become aware of it, it doesn't drive you. It's like you might even go ahead and eat that food. Maybe it's chocolate chip cookies, but if you go, oh yeah, this reminds me of the time that my mother and I made chocolate chip cookies, and now that she's passed on, I really miss her. But if you're aware of that, you're not going to eat the whole bag of chocolate chip cookies. You'll eat the cookies and be fine with it. So in the beginning, you're right. I think for many people, some sort of a food plan is really important to kind of reduce all the static around this. And then once that kind of gets steady and your interoceptive awareness is strong enough, then it really does reveal to you all these other things.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think that's something else that a lot of people sometimes get surprised by. Like, once they choose recovery, a lot of other emotions, a lot of other things can come up that might feel overwhelming. But I honestly think it's a great thing, because it allows you to work through certain things. And I have one last question for you. If you only had like one piece of advice that you could give somebody who feels stuck in recovery, or who doesn't know if they want to choose recovery, what would that be?
Well, I think it would be number one, total complete recovery is absolutely possible. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've seen people with the most severe eating disorder you can imagine. I've seen people that are in their 60s and had lifelong eating disorder, and I've seen them totally, completely recover. So I think it's important to understand recovery is possible. However, it does require that it's sort of like a weed. If you just cut it off at the top and just try to get rid of the behaviors and the symptoms, given the right circumstances, it can come back. But if you go down and clear those roots, it's a done deal.
Wow.
One more thing I want to say, because I believe this with every fiber in my being, that those who have struggled with eating disorders and gotten on the recovery path are the people the world has been waiting for. And what I mean by that is, because of this gift, when you claim your gift of emotional sensitivity and keen intuition, what comes with that is a great deal of empathy and compassion. And that is what the world needs right now. So I salute everyone that is on that journey. You're a perfect example of this, right? It's like it's a journey of consciousness that really assists where we're at in the planet today. So every little step you take is worth it.
I can only 100% agree with you. And Thank you so much for, doing this interview with me and also for sharing your wisdom, because that's what it really is, I think. I just love the completely different approach. I love, using metaphors, especially for somebody who is like so deep into their eating disorders. It might be so eye-opening to like work with metaphors and to understand that real recovery and full recovery is completely possible, because that's another thing that, unfortunately we've been even told by so many, like you will always struggle, when that is certainly not the case.
Yeah.
So, if anyone wants to find you, wants to learn more about your work, wants to purchase your book, where can they find you?
Okay, well, the book is on Amazon. You can go to my website, dranitajohnston.com. And if you want to learn about my courses, and I have a lot of free materials available at lightofthemooncafe.com. And if someone's interested in residential treatment, you can go to my program in Maui, aipono, AIPONO.com.
Thank you so much. And I will put all of that in the information box as well, so that people can find you. Again, thank you so much for taking the time, for sharing your wisdom. And I'm pretty sure you already helped so many people, and you will continue to help so many people.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.